Alicia Benavides in for Cynthia Borsellino, and this is Revived and Restored. We have Kim Daniel back with us again today.
Good morning.
Thanks so much for being here. We are continuing our dive into chapter 4 of Waking Up Gray and the Imposter. So, we all have been sitting in this chapter for a minute.
Wallowing. I was telling somebody I feel like I'm walking through mud and
Oh,
you
wow.
can't dance in the mud. So we got to get through the mud.
Yeah, it feels heavy. It definitely feels heavy. And we're not the only ones feeling that way.
No.
And even after I wrote my letter to my imposter, I shared that last week. And even with that, I think it's just a layer of this thing to unpack. And so I'm still very much learning about how I got an imposter in the first place. Where did this take place? And yeah, what prompted this, feeling that there was a need to reinvent. So something that I was working on this week was that they talk a little bit. There's some questions at the end of each chapter, and it talks about hurts and going back into the gray and choosing a moment in time or someone that or an event that happens right when you're wounded. And it talks about that creatively, but obviously that can be anything. I mean, imposters come in lots of different ways, and probably I'd say any imposter probably is going to affect our creativity, right? Because it skews our perception of ourselves, and it creates a lens that we're seeing life through. I had shared for myself that I feel like mine has a lot to do with like striving and things like that. And something kind of unusual or unexpected happened this week as I was processing through all of this. And there's a question in the book that's just like there's little side note questions, and they have a space to fill it in. And it says, "What event has held your pencil captive? What creative losses have you not yet grieved?" So for me, because that was so specific to creativity, it seemed like an obvious thing for me. Right before I got pregnant with my first child, I had really lofty aspirations of starting a business, and it was a creative business, like basically making artwork that would help fund women abroad in like specifically we started kind of in Africa, and I was in talks with World Vision about maybe working with some of their women like entrepreneurs. Wow. And that sounds way bigger and fancier, but I just happen to have a connection at my church that gave me the opportunity to have that conversation. But it was a really big deal, and it felt like a really big deal. And I was really pursuing it with my whole heart. And I when I got pregnant, I just happened to have really severe nausea.
Oh.
And it went on for like the whole time. And it was a struggle, and it sort of deflated a lot of things that I was doing and slowed me way down. So I just always figured it would be something that I would pick back up again. And I remember, and then I had my little boy, had a lot of like stomach issues, and we had all kinds of stuff. We had a lot of sleeping issues, and just there was stuff going on because of his tummy stuff. And so that brief hiatus kind of became a long stretch. And I remember the day when I got the letter in the mail that I hadn't like filed sales tax or whatever for however long. And so it was like, well, we're going to close your DBA. And I had to really grieve that. And there are still places in me now, because I haven't picked that back up again, that grieve that. And I think the biggest hit that I took in that was that it made me doubt whether or not I heard God.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, "Oh my gosh, maybe I don't hear him. Maybe this was not the time, because if he knew, like, this
Could have
little
been not the time.
this little person was coming and whatever." And I just thought, "Oh gosh," but um I do believe that regardless of our stumbling, God still uses things, and it's like, okay,
Mm,
well, I was able to get this far in that. So
mhm.
knowing that is a big deal, even though I didn't finish, right? So there's something hanging out there that's unfinished.
So I immediately thought of Abraham and the promises God made to him and how the timing was not what Abraham wanted.
Mm,
The Lord, I think, has done that in my life too, where there's been things He's said, and I've been able to hold on to those, but the timing either hasn't happened yet, or it definitely didn't happen when I thought it was supposed to
right.
happen.
Yeah.
But God's word is so powerful.
When I think
Yeah.
we're probably not ever wrong to run after him if we feel like he said go. And so
Yes.
that might have just simply been an exercise of faith for me to
Strengthen that
do
muscle.
it, to do
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
Now it feels harder to step into those places. I have way more responsibilities. I have 3 kids at home. I help my husband with his business and all these things, and I feel like it's just now, this season of life, where I can even entertain those kind of thoughts, because everybody's in school.
Mhm.
And it does, you do kind of reevaluate things when you come to this place. Um, and also just being the age that I am, I'm 46. I'm kind of, in the middle of life, and I'm thinking about things like, you evaluate
Mm.
where did you think you would be?
Mhm.
Where do you want to be? What's not lining up with that vision? All of those things kind of come to mind. So it's interesting to be working through
Mhm.
this type of book in
This
this
stage of
season of
life.
life. Yeah. But it's like, wow, what a great time to be doing it, because you're kind of already working through those thoughts in your head anyway.
Yes, yes.
Um, and so when in the book, at the back of this chapter, you have questions each day, just like, kind of like a workbook area in the book. And it talks about going back to a woundedness place, and I thought, well, that wasn't, somebody else did not do that to me, right? My child certainly did not do that to me. I guarantee he didn't want to have tummy trouble. So I was thinking, well, is there something else? And I was praying through that. Is there some other thing like that that's the wounded place? And I thought, a thing came to mind from my time in art school in my 20s. And I remember, I was at SDSU, I was in San Diego, I was, like, far away from family and stuff, I didn't have my people near me, and so, like, friendships were kinda like, it was, I made some sort of basic friendships and things like that in school, but I was going back to school for a second time, so I was older than everybody else, so there was that element. And
Hmm.
I remember I remember doing this painting, and there were, like, multiple figures in it, and there was a guy in my class that, it was just, we did a critique every time. Everybody had a critique every time we were finished with our paintings, we did that. That was just part of it. And I remember him, like, going over with his thumb and, like, trying to look and see, if my proportions were correct and if the scale was correct for each of the figures, like, interacting with each other. It was, like, a really complex painting. It was enormous, for one thing, and there were, like, 3 different figures. And it was in panels, so they were on separate panels. So I was working on them separately, but I
Wow.
was trying to be aware of all those things. Well, I remember him, like, really questioning that, and I got super offended, and I was like, "Excuse me?" And I'm like, "Well, I mean, I don't know that that was, like, the most important and critical point of the painting."
Mhm.
And I remember at the time thinking, "Wow, he usually does, like, he would it was actually kind of cool. He would do like kind of electronic elements
Hmm.
like sitting in front of a painting. So the painting frequently was like a backdrop for like these elements that he would introduce, like found objects kind of stuff. And they were interesting. But as far as technical ability, it was not a difficult thing to execute. It was more, and so I remember just thinking, wow, like
How
it's
can
really
he be critical
right.
based on his
Right, and
experiences?
he was not an art major. He was there,
Oh.
I think he was an engineer or something, and an engineering major, and he was there, like, that was like a fun class for him. So, like, I get it. It was just a different level of commitment and thought and experience and all the things, right?
Mhm.
But I thought, wow, I remembered that all these years later. I remembered that, and I thought, okay, well, maybe I need to, deal with that. And I remember there was another thing kind of tethered to that, where this girl kind of just said, well, you're just like complaining about being up here a lot, because I was overwhelmed with the amount of time that I had to spend. And I kind of felt like she was a friend, and I don't want to go too far into all this because it's really not about them. But the point was that I remember being hurt by that
Mhm.
and feeling like she's like, people just don't want to hear it.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, you're a horrible human being. That's probably what I thought at the time. I wasn't walking with God. I'm sure that's what I thought. And I was like, well, you're actually not that great of a friend that you would say that. I'm pretty sure I told her that. And that was fine. But what God showed me in it all was that, oh, maybe I had that striving thing happening, right? I wasn't leaving when people were leaving. I was staying there till like 2 a.m.,
Oh.
like on concrete floors. And, you're not going to take a huge oil painting home with you every time, right? So you're there at the school, everybody's gone, it's the middle of the night. You're there working because you're not going to take your homework home. Um, and then I feel like God was like, yeah, like, think about what you were doing there. Like, they wounded me in that space, probably because I was putting what I felt like so much effort into it, right?
Mhm.
And then it's like, okay, well, I also had friends who would come in and like whirling dervishes, like do the most amazing painting and just like put their paintbrushes down and walk out,
Oh.
because it was just a different style, it was a different mentality, it was
Yeah.
different everything, right? And it didn't make it any less, but I always thought, man, like they look like they're enjoying themselves. And I think because
Oh,
of the
and you
way
weren't.
I was not at all enjoying myself. I was absolutely stuck in striving. And when I read in there that it talked about, that it being God's mercy because it's giving you an opportunity for surrender. Well, you know, God helping you surrender or the need to
Mm.
surrender was probably completely not in my world at that
Mhm.
point in
Mhm.
time. But God was speaking to me because I started doing like a series of paintings not long after that were like self portraits. And when I look back at them, they're very spiritual.
Oh, wow.
They're very spiritual. And I knew I was searching for something, but I didn't really know it was that because I kind of was like, well, I grew up in church.
Mhm.
But I just didn't know what it really looked like to truly walk with God, let alone have your
Mhm.
identity in him, let
Mhm.
alone that there would be an imposter. And so I was like so struck by, wow, like he just snuck that in there on me. Like God just was like, hey,
He's
by the way,
so amazing.
there was an opportunity for you to surrender in this moment. Like you didn't understand it, but now
Mhm.
looking back on it, I think, oh my goodness, that was exactly
Mhm.
what that probably was. And so to invite Jesus into that space and heal that and be like, well, he used whatever comments and whatever, it's still a place, even if it's in hindsight, that I can look back and say, wow, and I was doing it then and it was
Oh,
stealing my joy.
yeah.
So get to the root of this thing, get to the root of this imposter thing and find the way out, find the way forward, because the cycle that's been happening is not working right. It's not bringing fruit
It
to your life.
gets tiring.
It is
Yes.
exhausting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
So anyway, that's what I discovered. That's what I discovered this week while working through all these things. And I just thought, I mean, that obviously was a wow moment for me because I just thought, gosh, why am I thinking about things that were however many years ago? It seemed like it
Mhm.
was not a big deal. And I thought, well, I mean, I don't need to revisit that. I don't even know those people anymore. But it was like, no, he wanted me
That's
to get to that kernel, right?
yeah,
That
yeah.
place. And so, anyway, that was pretty big for me.
Wow. So I've been struggling to identify my
Mm,
imposter. I I keep thinking, where where is it? What is it that's happening? And during the week, I listened to a book that was recommended last week, and I reread the chapter again and again, and it just kept causing me to say, I have to be silent. I have to be still.
mm.
Um, I can't find the name of the book now, but it the
Living
concept,
fearless.
living
Living fearless, I think
fearless.
is, yeah.
So the concept of finding the imposter is the way that we're approaching it in our chapter. And living fearless was more looking at it, who is my real identity?
Mm. Like
And
the flip side of that
the
same
flip side
coin.
of it. And that's easier for me to hold on to, but I know the imposter is there as a almost like a shadow on who I
Mhm.
really am. So trying to figure out, where do I stop and listen? And that's hard. It's so hard.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah, it can be.
today, talking about, it feels like, well, maybe it's not as much an imposter as just walls,
Mhm.
not being willing to look deeper than I needed to. Or I know God is safe.
Mhm.
He is always loving me. So I don't need to be afraid of that. But I must have been wounded in areas that I don't even remember, is the
Mhm.
only thing I can figure. Um, but it's so wonderful to lean into Him, to know that His care for us will touch parts of our lives and create in us so that we can be creative.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
Well, and it's interesting to think too is I think when you get to, well, or if your experience has been such that you immediately had like a transformation space or, moment where you fully rely on God and you see him as a safe
Mhm.
place and you know that about him.
Mhm.
I don't think everybody experiences that. I don't For me, like when you're talking about it, I think, well, I don't think imposters necessarily come up just because of how we feel about the Lord,
Mhm.
right? I mean, it could be for some people, it could be, but for you, since you knew that was safe, the walls may be about other things. It might be the people around you. It may be the other things, right?
Mhm.
And for me, strangely enough, I am on the other side of that scenario, right? Where sometimes for me, I have struggled with trust with the Lord. And I
Oh.
think that's just because of trauma in my life.
Mhm.
Um, and it's not like a conscious thing that I'm like, well, God let XYZ happen to me. I don't think I've ever processed it in an obvious way like that. But I mean, I think when you get to the root of it, for me, that's something that I've had to work on. It wasn't a given for me.
Mm.
Um, which is a tough space to be in because you need to hold his hand for everything.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so for me, that's part of what's been hard about a life in general and learning your identity in him and learning how safe he is and learning all that. For me, it's been a process
Mhm.
of building trust and knowing him and trusting that who he says he is, he actually is.
Hmm.
Especially because there's a fair amount of mixed messaging that we get about his character, right? I
Constantly,
mean, just even
yes.
in how people interpret scripture and what
Yeah.
people say to you or at you in life, it makes it really different.
Hmm.
Um, so for me, it's something that I'm understanding more and more as I walk this out, but it's
Mhm.
been a journey for me.
Hmm.
Um, Whereas because it's obvious, like, okay, I just expect that human beings are flawed, and at one point in time, that was super offensive to me, and God has taught me how to not be so offended and to just have a lot of grace because I need an enormous amount of grace, and
Mhm.
knowing that I need it so much, you, of course,
Hmm.
know that others do too.
Oh, yeah.
Um, but
Huh.
it's interesting. Well, that's inspiring to me just to hear you say, like, that was your absolute. You knew, like, you
Mhm.
knew with certainty that that's not your issue. Your issue isn't him because you knew he
Mm-mm.
was safe.
Mhm.
So then it's probably just, leaning on him, your safe place, that he will bring this to completion. Like, he will help you understand anything you need to understand
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. And he'll let me see it and walk through it when it's the
Mhm.
right time and
Yeah.
right space.
And
Hmm.
he's kind and gentle and,
Mhm.
frequently waiting on us, like we think.
Always, always, always.
Yeah, he's very gracious, and, yeah, when we want him to hurry up and we wanna get to the bottom of things, frequently, it's just, it's actually us. It's actually us that he's waiting for us to be ready,
Mhm.
because he will be kind and gentle about transforming us.
It's kinda like making fudge. You can put the ingredients in the pot and turn it on the heat, but you still have to wait until it gets to that right temperature.
Mm,
And turning the heat up too high makes it burn,
right.
and then it's no good.
Yeah.
So you have to go slow enough. Just let it happen.
Mhm.
Yeah. Lord, thank you that you are able to work in us and out through us those things that need to be dealt with, need to be brought totally into the light,
Yeah.
and we
Yeah,
don't have to fear.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So we were talking earlier today about just the fact that everybody, like pretty collectively in our gathering of ladies, is kind of feeling similar things, right? We're
Mhm.
all we're all needing some time to just sit in this chapter.
Yeah.
Um, And so I've just been thinking about, and everybody's journey is looking a little bit different. Some people feel like there's a lot of layers, like they might have multiple imposters. And I'm like, oh gosh,
That's
yeah,
scary.
oh no. But it could be the truth. But I
Yeah.
love that everybody is willing, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's willing to just stay in it. And nobody is,
Rejecting each other
no,
because
not
of
at
our
all.
imposters.
Yeah, not at all. Well, and I don't think anybody's feeling rushed too,
No.
because I know we were, like, really wanting to stay on track and
Mhm.
get through the book. Um,
Maybe the rest of the book will go really quick.
I feel like, honestly, because I have gone through this book to some degree, like, almost all the way to the end previously, and this chapter is where I got hung up. I couldn't answer the questions. I just couldn't get
Mm.
through it. And I think it is what,
Mm.
like we've said, it is a really deep dive, because it's the place that's held our pencil captive, right? As she
Yes.
says in the book. So if the goal is unlocking your creative journey again, like getting that moving, greasing the wheels again, I think I think this is the imperative place, right? This is the place that's the stuck place. It's the dammed up place that needs to be, flowing again.
So in my mind, I think I'm a creative person already, but I recognize that the creativity that comes from me is not the same as the
Mm,
creativity that comes from
true.
the fountain, the throne.
Yeah, I
You know,
totally
there's
agree.
there's a piece that isn't flowing from him that needs to be flowing out of me maybe.
Right. Yeah, well, and
So,
I see my pictures of creativity are shifting a lot with this book, which is huge. But I think, the striving part of me tends to get really about my flesh when I'm trying to do a lot of things. And so, and those are things that God's been unpacking really for years
Yeah,
and
and he'll
helping me with for years. And I'm way different and I hold on less tightly, a much, much more so now than before. And that's just been a process. So
Mhm.
I'm interested to see like where the root is and unpacking all that to get to the heart of it and get past this
Mhm.
because um I feel like we are going to get past it
Oh,
because everybody's
yes.
staying in it. And
Yes.
it's going to be where the real transformation comes and where it does start to flow, not from our flesh, but from our Father. And so I'm just really excited to see that take shape because I'm like, wow, if an entire group of women is having the exact same issue, when that happens, I just can't even imagine what's gonna come from it.
Wow.
I mean, it's pretty exciting to think of, isn't it?
Yes.
So, um, we're just excited that you guys are on this journey with us, and we're hoping that maybe, you might wanna pick up a book and do this journey with us too, or even start a group wherever you are. Um, so if you would like to reach out to us and get more information about the book or anything that we're doing, or about starting a group and getting some support for that, you can reach out to us at beloved